So just a quick video addressing a question that I had about raising corn. The question was, can you raise corn in trays, and are they okay being sown out once they are germinated and a little bit bigger? Or do you need to direct sow them into the garden? Usually I don't do both, usually I do one or the other, and neither method has ever really been a favoured method. They both have their pros and they both have their cons. This season, however, I sowed seed for sweet corn in the garden bed behind me, and I also sowed a tray of these heirloom varieties in the hothouse. Now, these guys have been planted out for about a week. They're doing really well. I've never had a problem with raising in a tray and sowing out. Planting out, sorry. And so these guys, as you'll see, are doing really well. They're nice, vigorous plants. And I will skip over to show you the other varieties of sweet corn that I direct sowed in the ground. So we're over at the other garden bed now, and these little sweet corn, just here and here, are a good example of ones that I direct sowed in the garden bed. Now, if you look really carefully, you can see them scattered around, not quite as tidy as the ones in the bed behind me, but they have germinated and they are looking okay. The example that they do set though is for these little sweet corn. They were sown 2 weeks earlier than the ones in the other garden bed that I showed you that were sown in the hothouse. Now, the advantage of sowing them in trays is I was able to keep them in a far more warm environment. I was able to manage the watering a lot more consistently than you do in a garden bed, and so that's shown in the vigor of the previous plants that I just showed you. These guys will do just fine. They will grow and they will produce and they will be lovely big plants. It's just taking them a little bit longer. Where the last lot I showed you in the other garden bed, you can see them distinctly. They're very, very easy to spot because they're nice and tall. They look nice and healthy. And to be honest, this time round, I suffer from a condition called impatience. And instead of hardening them off like I should have done, which is when you take them out of the hothouse during the day, let them get acclimatized to the slightly different temperature, put them back in overnight and prolong that period, extend it out until such time as they're out full time, and then you can put them in the ground. Didn't do that, basically took them from the 27-degree warm hothouse and put them straight in the bed that I showed you. And they're doing just fine. In fact, they're really thriving. So though there is a little bit of a difference between variety, obviously the seeds that I sowed in the trays are heirloom variety, and so you could say that there's a difference due to the differing varieties. The ones in the garden are not heirloom, they're just open pollinate, and I think some might be hybrid variety. And so that might be a difference, but you would expect almost that any that are hybrid variety would be more vigorous. So that just gives you an idea of the difference between sowing in the hothouse or sowing in a tray in a more controlled environment, as opposed to direct sowing into the garden bed when it comes to corn. So the answer to the question is yes, it is absolutely perfectly fine, if not in some cases advantageous to sow in trays and then subsequently plant out later. Is it better to harden them off? Absolutely. Do you have to? Obviously not, but you are taking a chance there that they might not do so well, and they might struggle when they first go out into the garden, away from those controlled circumstances of watering, temperature, and so forth. The other thing, just before I go, to note is that in the garden bed it is also harder to control any predatory pests like slugs, snails and such. So you'll notice that these little corn that I showed you, they do have a bit of damage. There's also birds out here. Thankfully the chickens, knock on wood, haven't gotten in this garden bed as yet, but you do always run that risk that it is much harder to control pests like slugs, snails, even earwigs and such when they're direct sown. But they will be nice strong plants because they haven't had it quite as easy as the others. So I'll try and keep a track over the season as to how they go, and yeah, I hope that helps. Hope that answers the question.